The collapse of France in 1940 is one of the most misunderstood events of the Second World War and is often reduced to a lazy myth that the French army was weak, cowardly, or unwilling to fight. This narrative is comforting because it simplifies a complex disaster into a moral failure. But it is historically false. In May 1940, France possessed one of the largest and most experienced armies in the world, with millions of mobilized soldiers, modern tanks that in many cases outgunned German armor, and a defensive doctrine shaped by the trauma of the First World War. French soldiers did not lack courage. In many sectors, they fought with determination, inflicting heavy casualties and holding their positions even when surrounded. The problem was not the individual soldier, but the system in which he was trapped. French military planning was built around the assumption that war would resemble 1914-1918, slow, methodical, defensive, and dominated by artillery and fortified lines. The Maginot Line symbolized this mindset, not as a sign of stupidity, but as a rational response to the bloodbath of the previous war. France wanted to avoid another generation being destroyed in open field offensives. What French commanders did not anticipate was the speed at which the German army would move once it committed fully to combined arms warfare. German success in 1940 was not based on superior numbers or equipment, but on operational tempo. Panzer divisions, supported by close air support and flexible command structures, penetrated deep into French territory before the high command could even understand what was happening. French units were often ordered to hold positions that no longer made strategic sense, because information moved too slowly up the chain of command. Orders were centralized, cautious, and delayed, while German officers were encouraged to exploit opportunities without waiting for permission. This created a catastrophic mismatch between reality at the front and decisions made at headquarters. Entire French formations were still maneuvering according to outdated plans, while German spearheads had already broken through at Sedan and raced toward the Channel. The famous image of France surrendering overnight hides weeks of brutal fighting, chaotic retreats, and desperate counterattacks that failed not because of cowardice, but because they were fragmented and uncoordinated. By the time political leaders understood the scale of the disaster, the strategic situation was already irrecoverable. The myth of French weakness was later reinforced by propaganda, post-war embarrassment, and the desire of other nations to explain victory or defeat in moral terms. In reality, 1940 was not a story of a weak army, but of a modern state caught between an old war and a new one, learning too late that the battlefield had changed faster than its institutions could adapt. Another element that critically shaped the French defeat in 1940 was the internal culture of command, which rewarded caution over initiative and obedience over adaptability. Senior officers were often veterans of the First World War, deeply marked by the trauma of trench warfare and mass casualties. When German units broke through unexpected sectors, frontline commanders frequently waited for confirmation or approval before reacting, even when the situation clearly demanded immediate improvisation. German officers, by contrast, were trained to exploit opportunity without waiting for orders, a concept known as Auftragstaktik. If communication with higher command failed, they acted anyway. This asymmetry meant that every hour favored the attacker. The French army also suffered from fragmented intelligence interpretation. Reconnaissance aircraft, border units, and even Belgian warnings provided data suggesting a major armored push through the Ardennes. Yet this information conflicted with pre-war assumptions, so it was downplayed rather than integrated. Doctrine shaped perception. What did not fit the model was treated as noise. Logistics further compounded the problem. French supply systems were efficient for a slow, methodical advance but brittle under rapid retreat. Fuel depots, ammunition dumps, and command posts were positioned with the expectation of static fronts. When those fronts dissolved, resupply failed, not because resources were lacking, but because they were in the wrong place. Meanwhile, German forces lived off momentum, capturing supplies and using speed to stay ahead of French reorganization. Air power also played a psychological role beyond its physical impact. The Luftwaffe did not destroy the French army from the air, but it disrupted movement, severed communications, and created the impression of omnipresence. Constant air attacks on bridges, columns, and refugee-filled roads magnified fear and exhaustion, making coordinated resistance increasingly difficult. Political instability added another layer of paralysis. France in 1940 was a nation exhausted by internal divisions, haunted by demographic losses from the previous war, and uncertain about how much sacrifice it could endure again. As military setbacks accelerated, civilian leadership wavered between continued resistance, and the desire to preserve what remained of the state. This hesitation filtered downward, undermining confidence in ultimate victory. The collapse, therefore, was not the result of cowardice or incompetence at the individual level, but of an entire system built for a different kind of war. When confronted with speed, decentralization, and shock, that system fractured. Understanding this reality dismantles the myth of French weakness and replaces it with a far more uncomfortable truth. Even powerful armies can fail, catastrophically, when their assumptions about war are wrong. In the final analysis, the 1940 campaign exposes a pattern that repeats throughout military history. Defeat rarely comes from a single failure, but from the quiet alignment of many small certainties that turn out to be wrong. France entered the war, believing it had solved the problem of defense through preparation, fortification, and numerical balance. On paper, this confidence was justified. In reality, the battlefield rewarded flexibility, speed, and psychological disruption more than mass or material. Once German forces crossed the Meuse and severed the Allied armies in Belgium from the French heartland, the war transformed from a conventional campaign into a race against collapse. French units continued to fight locally, sometimes with extraordinary determination, but without a coherent operational picture. Their efforts could not reconnect into a functioning whole. Retreat turned chaotic, not because soldiers panicked, but because command structures disintegrated faster than new lines could be formed. Communication failures meant orders arrived late, uncontradicted each other, or referenced positions that no longer existed. In such conditions, even disciplined forces lose cohesion. The myth of French passivity also ignores the fact that the campaign unfolded at a speed that shocked every observer. Entire operational assumptions collapsed within days, leaving no time for doctrinal adaptation. Germany did not win because it was invincible, but because it forced decisions faster than the French system could process them. This distinction matters, because it reframes the fall of France as a warning rather than a national flaw. Modern wars are not won solely by superior weapons or larger armies, but by organizations that can absorb uncertainty and act decisively within it. The French army of 1940 was not designed to do that. Its strength lay in control, structure, and predictability, virtues that become liabilities when the enemy thrives on chaos. The armistice that followed was therefore not an admission of moral failure, but a recognition that the strategic foundation had collapsed beyond immediate repair. In the decades after the war, historians gradually dismantled the caricature of French incompetence, revealing instead a tragic mismatch between preparation and reality. Remembering this matters today, because it challenges the comforting belief that modern institutions are immune to sudden breakdown. The lesson of 1940 is not that France was weak, but that certainty is dangerous. When leaders believe they already understand the next war, they stop preparing for the one that actually comes. The fall of France in 1940 ultimately reminds us that history is not shaped by stereotypes, but by systems under pressure. Armies, like societies, do not fail because their people lack courage, intelligence, or will. They fail when rigid assumptions collide with unexpected reality.